are good. I'm going to turn the recording on, and then I'm going to go live on Facebook. And then I'll tell you in a couple seconds when we're on.
Okay.
And we're doing it on the page. And it takes a couple seconds. Okay, great. And we are live on Facebook.
So we can get started?
Let's give people like a minute to start coming in, because I know even Dr. Bandelli has people that are coming in, and our Black Mental Health Alliance people will be coming in as well. So we'll give everyone a couple minutes. Not a couple minutes, but like a minute or two.
Okay.
Sure, yeah.
We're following your lead, Roxanne.
That's all right. That's all right.
Sorry, it was playing back. And I think we can get started. We have a couple people on Facebook Live.
All right.
You can start, Richard.
Okay. I'm sorry. Good afternoon, everyone. Those of you who have joined us for our Conversation in Black session this afternoon. It is, of course, March the 15th at 2 o'clock, a little bit after 2 o'clock, and we want to welcome all of you to the Black Mental Health Alliance's Conversation in Black session that we are hosting today. And we want to thank, of course, our special engineer and technical assistant, Roxana, Thinkster, who has brought us in, and hopefully you can hear us, hear me, and we'll be able to hear all of us in a few minutes. So again, welcome to our conversation this afternoon, and I think you're going to be in for a real treat. We have a guest who has accomplished much in a short period of life. He has done quite a bit. He is doing a lot to really bring attention to issues related to mental health, and also to issues related to relationships, which is something that we're going to talk about throughout this conversation, but get into some aspects of relationships on the back end of this conversation. So we're going to try to do two things today. We're going to try to talk about something that happened to him and how he came through his mental health challenges, which I think is critical and important. And then we're going to talk about a training session that he's going to be conducting next week. And we hope that some of you will be able to join us in that conversation with our guests. Let me just say a few things about our guests before we get into our conversation. But of course, my name is Richard Rowe. My name is Richard Rowe, and I'm the director of the Training Institute for the Black Mental Health Alliance. And it is my pleasure and honor to be present today to host this conversation with our guest. He is a remarkable individual, and I heard him on a couple of interviews that we hosted several months ago, and read his book. His book is entitled Relational Intelligence. And there are chapters in this book that are just fascinating. A chapter that really intrigued me, all of them did, but one that really intrigued me and interested me was the chapter on family relationships, powerful chapter. He has chapters on personal relationships, family relationships, marriage, and so forth. So he's covered the ground, the landscape on all aspects of living relationships. But let me just say a few things about him, and then let's get into this conversation, because we don't have a whole lot of time. And I don't want to spend a lot of time just talking. I want him to talk more, but he's the founder and managing director of Bandelli and Associates. Dr. Adam Bandelli is an organizational psychologist and a seasoned leadership advisor with over 20 years of corporate consulting experience. He's a visionary entrepreneur and a leading expert on human behavior and relationships. And in his latest book, Relational Intelligence, he outlines his research-based framework of the 5 essential skills people need to build life-changing relationships. Adam's calling and purpose in life is to help readers and leaders use relational intelligence to identify, embrace, and unleash their true authentic selves, enabling them to transform the quality of all their professional and personal relationships. And a few other quick notes about Dr. Bandelli. He was raised in Howell, New Jersey, by his mom, single parent, and as a special education teacher, his mom taught him the meaning of empathy and having a deep understanding of others. Adam connected with others through playing basketball. So yes, he thinks he can play basketball. Everyone.
But he has enough shoes. I don't know if he can play.
he thinks he can play basketball. He quickly learned that the most impactful coaches build lasting bonds with their players. His experiences playing basketball and emulating players like Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Michael Jordan made him fascinated with the question, what makes great leaders great? In college, he continued to learn about the value of relationships, and Adam received his PhD and master's degree from the University of South Florida in industrial organizational psychology, and a bachelor's degree concentrating in psychology and business management from Fairleigh Dickinson University. He met mentors, he met others in college that basically, sharpened his skills and caused him to really focus on relationships. And again, we'll talk more about some of the pillars of the relational intelligence paradigm that he has created. But let's get into this conversation that I really, really want to have with Dr. Bandelli. Dr. Bandelli, welcome to the program.
Welcome. So glad to be here today.
Glad to have you, sir. That was some of your professional background that I shared with our audience. And again, listening to me talk about, your accomplishments, and there's so many. I could really spend another 5 minutes just reading your bio and listing all your accomplishments. But what really intrigued me was a conversation you had with one of my associates, Roxana, a few months ago about your episode with, or your mental health challenge.
Yeah.
A number of years ago, you basically was diagnosed with bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
And so I really want to start there if we could. I want to start there for all the important reasons. We have a lot of, men, especially in our society and in the Black community, who find it very difficult to talk about mental health disorders, who basically find it difficult to seek help, find it difficult to really understand and appreciate why it's important for them to talk about some of these issues. And you basically lay it all out. I think your experiences and your conversations around this issue and your presentation around these issues will save lives, in my humble opinion, because you are transparent, you don't hold back. So if you don't mind, could we start there? Can you start with, what happened to you, back in 2007?
Yeah.
And let's build from there, if you don't mind, please.
Yeah, absolutely, Richard. Happy to do that. So going back 2005, 2006, 2007, I was entering graduate school down in Tampa, University of South Florida. And up until that point in my life, Richard, I was the typical type A, go-getter, goal-oriented, never really dealt with much adversity in life. Education, school came easily for me. Athletics came easy. In my second semester of graduate school, for the first time in my life, I started feeling symptoms of depression. Couldn't get out of bed in the morning, lack of interest in going to work, lack of interest in working out, taking care of myself, shaving, grooming, all the type of things that start to fall apart when you start to have symptoms of depression. And for someone who at that age, very little humility, big ego, I didn't know what was going on. It was very scary. I kind of trotted along for a good 6-8 weeks as things got worse. And I have some family members, extended family, who have gone to therapists and, dealt with anxiety and depression. Spoke to one of them and they recommended that I see a counselor on campus. Never been to a therapist before. I viewed therapists as folks that only were needed to help people who had problems. And I didn't have a problem. I just was feeling down. But took my uncle's advice and went and spoke, did a couple sessions. And with any depressive episode, it eventually lifts after a series of time. You can accelerate that, I've learned now, by doing certain things. But that first experience of being depressed, I didn't know when it was going to go away. Several months later, in my mind, I tried to make up for the 3 or 4 months that I called myself sluggish or lazy. And so I started pushing myself harder, but I started to notice more abnormal behaviors, the biggest one being sleeping 2 hours a night. And that went on for about a month or so. Risky behaviors, spending, drugs, alcohol, all the things that you would see tick off on a DSM for someone who is in a manic episode. My friends couldn't talk to me. My family couldn't talk to me. I thought I was fine. About 2 or 3 months after that, I took a job out in Cincinnati for an internship as part of my program. And within 8 weeks, I was suicidal. And so, course of about 12 to 18 months, I had gone from one major depressive episode into a manic episode and then into a depressive episode again. My father at the time, it was a godsend. He was with me one weekend. He came to visit me and he saw the look on my face as soon as he walked in my apartment. His son was not in his right state of mind. And I remember he was coming for the weekend, and on Sunday night, he was getting ready to leave. And I said, please don't leave me. I'm not sure what I'll do to myself if I'm here by myself. And he saw the urgency in my eyes. And so he stayed with me for a week. And then he realized that he had to get me to get help, packed up all my stuff. We drove 12, 14 hours back to Virginia where he lives. And he took me to one of my first psychiatrists that I've been to. Now, again, this is almost 20 years ago. So the bedside manner and the way physicians are trained today around empathy and compassion is very different than what they were trained 20 years ago. But the psychiatrist that I met with asked me to start explaining what was going on. And within 2 to 3 minutes, cut me off and said, you have bipolar disorder, take this set of meds and come back and see me in 2 to 3 weeks. In that moment, a 22, 23-year-old who thinks the world revolves around him, I outright rejected the diagnosis. I said, you're wrong. Someone getting their PhD in psychology could never have a psychological disorder. I chalked it up to being a nervous breakdown. Didn't stick with any therapy program, didn't stick with any medication program. 3 or 4 months later, the depression lifted again. And I looked at it all as just a nervous breakdown in grad school. Over the course of the next decade, Richard, when you are not medicated and you're not in a program and doing therapy for bipolar disorder, your life fluctuates in extremes, either the extreme highs of mania or the extreme lows of depression. When you're in a manic phase or hypomanic phase, you engage in extreme behaviors. So for a couple of years, these behaviors were productive. I didn't run 2 or 3 miles a week. I started running marathons. That for 2 or 3 years, again, extreme behavior. Then I got in with the wrong crowd through some of my work and some of the friends that I was associating with. We'll talk about that in a little bit. You are the people you surround yourself with. And I fell into a wicked substance abuse addiction that almost took my life several years after that. And it wasn't until I knew that I had a problem, almost died of an overdose, that I checked myself into a rehab, accepted that I did have bipolar disorder and that I was living in denial about it for a decade, and started to get the help that I needed to. That was the start of my mental health journey. This is over a decade ago. And there have been many learnings and ebbs and flows and backslides and many things that have come up that have really been trial by error for me. I don't have anyone in my family, father, uncles. I don't have anyone that's been a role model who has invested and sowed into my life to say, here's the blueprint or the playbook of what you need to do to be healthy. I've had to kind of figure out along the way, but I'm blessed to say that I've come up with a solution that works in my life. And one of the pieces I'd like to tell your audience today, or anyone, especially Black young men who are first diagnosed with mental health, it is a journey that is unique to you. There are price of admission things around understanding and learning about anxiety and depression and bipolar, but then it really becomes more of an art as you understand your values and your beliefs and your personality and what is going to work for your life.
So Adam, powerful story. And again, we'll get into some of the trials and some of the challenges that you experience, because one of the things that we talked about prior to this conversation is the way men are socialized in our society. And I am certain that contributes to our this notion of we are in control, that we really don't need help. Talk about that if you don't mind for a few minutes. How does our socialization contribute to our sense of denial, or this notion of we don't need help and we shouldn't ask for help because that basically makes us seem weak or effeminate? Can you talk about that for a few minutes?
Yeah, so I think it's a great kind of segue into the work we're going to do next week with your organization. Everything starts in the home. And so our parents, our fathers, our mothers, if you come from a healthy and well-knit family structure, are the ones who teach us about having self-awareness, developing empathy, understanding and learning about ourselves. Unfortunately, in my case, in many children's cases growing up, you don't come from an environment where that's the case. Whether that's neglect, abandonment, mental health of your parents, substance abuse of your parents, there are things that kind of leave children to figuring out a lot of these things on their own. And then you look at the layers of things that Black men deal with, whether it's racism, cultural differences, faith-based differences. There are a number of factors that overlay each other that unless someone has good mentors, and I'm very blessed that I've had good mentors throughout my life, you can go off course in the wrong direction very easily. I think one situation that's been in the news recently is John Morant, who is the star of the Grizzlies. His situation is unique because he came from a good household, went to private schools, but in terms of the social circles and the people that he has surrounded himself with the last 5 or 6 years, the messages of masculinity and hyperaggression and what it means to keep it real, have cost him. He may lose a deal with Nike. He may get suspended from the NBA. And so in that situation, I was watching Charles Barkley and Kenny Smith on Inside the NBA a couple weeks ago. There was no veteran player in that locker room, no mentor to pull him aside and say, you're going down the wrong path. And so again, I think when I look at my life and I look at the examples like this or people that we work with, young Black men are not being mentored and coached. People are not investing in their lives today. And I think I know in my own situation, a lot of the things that I've gone through in my life have been trial by error. There's been no role model or no person that's kind of helped me along that journey. And so I think that's unfortunate, but it's something that if we can do that and start to do that with our young Black men and women, we'll be able to help them better position for mental health awareness going forward.
And that's why this conversation is so important. Trial by error is not going to save the lives of a lot of our young men in particular. It's going to require something more structured, something more intentional to really help the hundreds and thousands of young men that we encounter and that we know are out there struggling with this whole sense of seeking help or some of the mental health challenges that many of them are faced with. Let's go back to your episode or your mental health disorder. Manic depression or manic episodes, from there to suicide ideation, and everything else in between. And it took you 10 years, Dr. Bandelli, to really accept your diagnosis. Some of that was, in my estimation, from listening to you and knowing a little bit more about you, some of it came from not having the right mental health professional, guide you or relate to you. Talk about how that really interfered with helping you appreciate and understand what you were going through. It seemed like he just gave you a diagnosis and sent you on your merry way and prescribed some medication that you didn't really didn't want to take because you really didn't connect with him.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, in the work we do at my firm, we have a saying, it's not what you do, it's how you do it.
Mm-hmm.
So the physician that we're talking about was well-intentioned. I mean, he diagnosed me in 3 minutes. That was a fact. It took me 10 years to realize that. But the how he delivered the message, there was no desire to understand the person that was sitting in front of him. I was a patient, I was a number. And so the way that that message was delivered to me, again, this is 15, 20 years ago, being told you have bipolar disorder was being told you had a cancer diagnosis, that your life was going to be changed forever. There wasn't a number of psychiatrists and therapists that I work with, colleagues, friends, if they're giving that type of life-changing information to someone, there is a contextual background that they share. There are resources that they provide. It's not just here's what your situation is, and here's some meds to help you for the next 2 weeks. And so I think that was the how that I was told that I have a mental health disorder was really one of the things that initiated me saying, no, that they're wrong. They don't know me. How can you know me in 2 minutes and know my whole life? And so that was the big thing for me, at least. But then there were also the pieces on my end. You know, as I mentioned already, there was zero humility when I was 22, 23 years old. And we'll talk about probably a little bit. My faith is kind of the cornerstone of my life. And I had to be taught humility. And that was part of my process and my journey for doing that. But, you know, I thought the world revolved around me at that point. And so to be told that you have a mental health challenge that you're going to have to live with for the rest of your life, I don't think I was able to process that at that time.
Right. And it really wasn't until you almost lost everything.
Yeah, I was, again, almost overdosed on the floor of my house. Yeah.
Precisely. And again, folks out there listening, think about what we are sharing with you this afternoon. There is a bright individual who basically had everything, you know, and everything, not just in terms of material acquisitions or wealth and all of that, but he had everything going for him and almost lost everything. And the lesson from that is that why should it take? Why does it take?
Yeah.
Especially for men to almost lose everything that's important, that really is important. Why does it take us so long to arrive at a place that took you 10 years to arrive? Yeah. Why does it take us so long, Dr. Bandelli, to get there? I know we talked about the socialization and our programming as men in our society, but, you know, share again with, if you don't mind, why does it take us so long? And again, you didn't have, you know, the right relationships at that point. You had some, but it just wasn't enough to really say, sit down, calm down, pause, and basically understand and appreciate where you are and what's happening to you.
Yeah. I think at its most basic level, Richard, people don't change until they have a burning platform and need to change. I felt for myself that, you know, making 6 figures, living in New York City, had a PhD at 25, little issues that were happening on the side. I didn't need to change those. Those were minor things. Those weren't things that were impacting my life. And then 3 months goes by and 6 months goes by and 2 years go by. And what was once a little issue is now an addiction or is now a major life habit or characteristic that you live with. And so I think in my case, it was definitely, you know, those things aren't important now. I have it under control.
And so among certain Black men in particular, Adam, Dr. Bandelli, you know, there's this belief that mental illness is not really a medical condition, but rather a moral one. Was that ever your thinking? Because you mentioned briefly about your faith.
Yeah.
And just wondering how you basically reconciled, you know, the two.
So if I start back in the home where I think everything begins, I come from a multicultural, multi-ethnic background. My parents got divorced, as you mentioned, I was young. My father is an imam, a very devout practicing Muslim. My mother is a Christian, very devout with her faith as well. And so I grew up in an environment where I would spend weekends in a church with my mother, other weekends in a mosque with my father. And so the men that were in my life at that point in time, my father, other male figures that I met and knew through him, you didn't talk about mental health. You didn't talk about weakness or vulnerability. The word vulnerability was not in anyone's vocabulary. And whether that was being a Black man or whether that was just being a father figure, like you had to always be tough. You had to always have everything together. Another huge thing that has impacted me and my siblings till today is how to process and manage emotions.
Mm-hmm.
How do you process anger? How do you process frustration? How do you process when someone hurts you? None of these things were taught to me. And so I think a lot of those things are some of the factors that play into it, is that when it's not started in the home, where are kids going to learn these skills, to develop these skills like empathy, like compassion, the things that are important later in life.
Right. And I thought, I noticed that in your chapter in your book, Relational Intelligence, in the chapter on family relationships, you really zero in on everything that happens in the home, good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of good that happened in your home, even though, I mean, we lift up adverse childhood experiences. There were some of those experiences that you had. You had a brother that you were close to.
Yeah.
Your mom was clearly, played a very important role in your life.
Yeah.
And taught you a lot about empathy and how you should treat others and so forth. But again, why this series is so important, because we're trying to really center our conversations on the significance and importance of family and home. Yeah. And Dr. Bandelli will be, again, doing a training for us, 3-hour training for us next week that we hope many of you will sign up for. It's next Wednesday, March 22nd, from 1 until 4. And he will be taking all of his knowledge and his skills and bringing all of his knowledge and skills and expertise to that session to really help us understand how we can start within our homes and within our families to start the process of trusting each other, relating to each other, building with each other, loving each other, and all those important factors that go into enhancing, our relationships. And so again, please don't forget to sign up for the session that we are hosting next week that will feature Dr. Bandelli, who will again be bringing his relational intelligence paradigm into that training session that I think will be beneficial to all of us that are either going through something in our homes or working with clients or working with individuals who are experiencing some of these challenges that he has simply, shared with us this afternoon. A little bit more about the bipolar disorder challenges, Dr. Bandelli, because I think I want to really leave men with something that they can truly take with them. So if you had to really, if you had to really share with Black men, given your experiences with this disorder, yeah, given your trials and tribulations and everything that you went through and had to go through, what would you want to really, really share with Black men and leave them with in terms of going forward?
Yeah. So I think it's a big question to unpack, but I think it's multi-layered, Richard. I think first, there's the 3 factors that I think will help to eradicate the stigma. One is awareness. I think educating Black men about what bipolar disorder is and what it is not, and how they can get help and what resources available is really critical. I think engagement, having conversations like the ones we're having today, and letting people know that you can live a healthy, functioning adult life once you come to the self-awareness that you have a mental health disorder and you figure out what's going to work for you to manage your disease. Your disease is not your identity. And really being able to have people who understand that about your life and can be a support system. And then I think the third piece, which is often hardest for most people, is taking ownership for your life. Bipolar disorder is not a death sentence. In my own experiences, I've learned to effectively live with it and manage it by getting the right support system, which includes both personal and professional help. I have a therapist I've been seeing now for 10 years, psychiatrist the same. My parents, my siblings, I have family and resources that are there to help me when I'm going through my low seasons or my valley points. So that was what I would say at the start of it. I think the other piece is when we look at the Black community, I think there are roles that seasoned Black men, my age, your age, play in mentoring the next generation. I've talked about it several times already. A lot of what I had to learn was by trial by error. It was not by someone mentoring me. If someone was to have grabbed me at 10 or 15 and it told me ways or tools or techniques to express emotions, maybe I would have found a better way to manage my stress than turning to cocaine. And so that I think is a big piece. And then I think the biggest thing that I've learned on my journey that I would share with any other Black man is the stereotypes and the stigma and the beliefs that are out there about mental health in general. They don't apply to you. You're a unique situation, case, and person. And there are, as I mentioned, price of admission things that you need to learn about to manage anxiety or depression or bipolar. But as you start to go further along in your journey, it's more of an art of figuring out what works for you, what works for your spouse or your kids or the life situation that you're in, and how you can daily take steps to improve your mental health.
Ownership, again, is key. And oftentimes we basically forget that is part of the equation. That, of course, what you said was so powerful in terms of your disorder is not you. How did you phrase that again? Your disorder is
not your identity.
Identity, right? Park yourself there. Stay there for a second and expand on that, please, because I think that's critical.
So your identity is a combination of a number of factors. It is your values and beliefs. It is your faith and spirituality. It is your personality and your wiring. It is your goals and aspirations that you have for your life. There are many factors that contribute to who you are and who is your authentic self. A lot of the work that we do around relational intelligence, Richard, is helping leaders identify, unlock, and embrace what that means for them. You get to define your identity. Disease doesn't identify your identity. The way other people view you, the way other races and ethnicities view you. Black men need to start owning and learning that they own their identity and that their identity is made up of multiple factors and not factors that white people have thrown at them or other folks have thrown at them. They get to define what that is. And then that's identity is made up of all those pieces.
And that's not easy. Of course, it's not easy to come to grips with, because again, we are taught everything opposite of what you just shared. And so I hope folks are listening that, if your disorder is not your identity, it's going to take some very, very important work. That's the work. The work is really wrestling with all those things that can help you with understanding who you are and whose you are. That's very, very critical and very, very important. And again, a lot of that starts at home. A lot of that in terms of who you are. If, again, this series is trying to suggest that if we can take control of our home environment and basically understand and appreciate the role of the family, we can at least prepare ourselves better to deal with a toxic society, a toxic environment, and a narrative that says Black men, are thugs or are criminals, or all the negative things that you mentioned about the basketball player. If you can talk about him a little bit more, because again, you said he came from a good home. That's John Morant or John Morant? Is that his name?
Yeah, came from a good home. From what I've read and what I've heard about, just really running with the wrong people. You become who you surround yourself with. And for whatever reason, again, this is a professional athlete, multimillionaire, the idea of keeping it real and however he defined what hood meant to him, doing things like waving guns at kids in basketball parks, bringing guns into nightclubs and starting Instagram live videos. And just, again, things that if there was an older veteran player on his team that would pull them aside and said, you have so much to lose. I say this to a lot of my clients now, as someone in his mid-40s, like, to what end? To what end are you going to engage in behaviors that can derail everything you've worked your entire life for? I think it's good. He has a good coach. He has good people around him who nothing dramatic happened. Someone didn't get shot in a nightclub. Something like he was able to, and he took ownership and admitted that he has difficulty managing stress. He was never taught how to do that. And these outlets and these behaviors he's engaged in the last 18 months have been the results of not managing stress effectively.
And as you indicated, he could lose everything. I was reading about him per your suggestion just yesterday. And again, just an amazing story, because again, as a young man, he is caught up in a definition of masculinity that I would say starts below the belt and not what's above the belt.
Yes.
And again, there are things that really is going to cause him, some serious problems and serious losses, and he may have to hit rock bottom. I hope that he's listening to this conversation or anyone that knows. And again, in all seriousness, this is a very, very, very important conversation that we're having this afternoon. Dr. Bandelli, what about, your recommendations for those working with, young men who are struggling with mental health disorders? I mean, you had a bad experience with the first psychiatrist who you encountered. Can you share with us maybe a few tips or a few thoughts around what those working with Black men should truly understand and appreciate that can help them overcome some of their, thoughts around what they should be doing and what help they need?
Yeah, so that's a fabulous segue, Richard, into what we're going to take your team through next week.
Yeah.
So very hopeful that people will join. But relational intelligence, we define that as the ability to successfully connect with people and build strong, long-lasting relationships. And I think for any mental health professional that is seeing clients or patients, the biggest piece of advice that I have at a high level is make sure that you treat your clients as human beings, not just as your 7th appointment on a day of 10 appointments. People pick up on some of the subtle things that even a professional will do or not do. That was the case in my situation, but therapists who can show empathy quickly, that can find common ground, that know how to establish rapport and use their energy to really connect with someone. The energy from the psychiatrist I met with, I don't even think he made eye contact with me. He just was writing stuff down in his notepad and then just gave me a script. So simple things, the common ground, the making eye contact, reading nonverbal body language. When we talk about building rapport, it's a concept most people know about at a surface level, but at its finest, when it's mastered, it's an art. The ebb and flow between two people, the picking up on subtle nuances. I know in my training as a psychologist, we were never taught about some of those softer skill aspects that impact how you show up and build relationships with other people. So that would be some of the surface level. I think the deeper level, especially for Black men, is really helping them think through the identity piece. In the book, I talk about doing a mirror test where you really kind of get honest with yourself and think about whether it's journaling or with a therapist, like what are your values? What are the things that are important to you at 20? What are they when you're 30? What are you really good at? What do you think? What's your purpose? Why are you doing the work that you do or looking to be in the career you have? I think helping Black men understand values and purpose is a really great way to start to offset some of the things that happen just by default when they're not provided with the resources to do that.
And I would even suggest that we start even earlier with helping young boys. And I know you would probably agree that it really, that kind of conversation, those kind of conversations should really start early. They may not be able to grasp at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, but at least place on the table or in front of them, this notion of who you are. And your purpose. I mean, if we start lifting up purpose and your why are you here? I think that's going to plant very, very important seeds in the minds of young men that they have something greater. There's something greater expected of them that we should really, really highlight and support. And so again, I know that, if we could, and I would definitely suggest that parents that might be listening to this conversation start early, because the narrative for Black men in this society is that, you are cast or you are going to only be able to do a few things, and that is either play sports or to engage in entertainment type activities. That's all you are here to do, is to entertain, either on a sports or on a football field, a basketball court, a baseball, a diamond, or what have you. But there's so much more that you can aspire to become. And so that conversation, I think, has to start early as well.
Richard, I've started to think about that a lot. Just kind of what you just said there around the stereotypes or biases, the way people look at Black men. And in my professional work, the last several years in the field of psychology, more broadly besides business psychology, we've seen much more people of color pursue degrees in psychology and social work and therapists. We've seen diversity across the board. It became more of a central theme after George Floyd in 2020. But I think we are stepping into an era that is more multicultural, multi-ethnic, and people are not just tolerant of it, but they're looking for it. You look at Gen Zs, they value that more than they value pay and joining organizations. Social responsibility is critical. So I think we're at a point now where, again, men like you, men like me, who have been seasoned and been through life, we have a real opportunity now with young Black men who are growing up in the home. I think a great example, my colleague Natalie is going to join us next week. Her son joined our call yesterday. What was the first thing he said to us? A 3-year-old kid, I'm a good listener.
A good listener, that's right.
Again, I have other family members who their kids meet you and they want to headbutt you when they first meet you. Like, it's just how you raise your kids is important, and you can start those habits and behaviors at 2, at 3, at 4 years old.
Right. And that's the good news. You've shared the good news about where we are right now, because more folks aren't talking about mental health and taking care of themselves. You know, my mental health matters, and it's okay not to be okay. We hear more and more individual celebrities, as well as just laypersons and community members, lift up, you know, this notion that, you know, my mental health, my responsibility. And so that's the good news. And there are more psychologists and psychiatrists and mental health professionals out there as well, as you indicated. So again, that's the good news. I would only suggest, though, that you know, this notion of ownership is one, and stigma are the two things that I would further lift up as you know, roadblocks or, you know, impediments to really getting us more and more men. I think women are doing a better job and doing the mirror check. Yeah. And men are too. I mean, more men are, but of course, you know, it takes a while when you are constantly indoctrinated and programmed to avoid seeking help or to man up. And not even
program, Richard, not even program, but just have watched and grown up and seen unintentional behaviors modeled.
Okay.
That's just all you know. You know, I look at my own family, my siblings and I, we were never taught how to process anger. And so it manifested itself in each of our lives in different ways. And again, you know, I talk about in the book, in the chapter on family, like, these are just things we never learned from our father, but we learned a lot of unintentional behaviors by just seeing what was modeled in our households.
Andrea shared mentorship among men is critical. Thank you for being transparent. Ownership. Okay, so there was Andrea was she shared something, I think, on the Facebook page. We have about, you know, a few more minutes left, Adam. And again, I would love for us to now maybe do two things: to really say a few more things about the training next week, what folks can expect from the training session, you know, and then hopefully leave our audience with, again, a kind of overall sense of, you know, that we can move forward, and we can save lives, and we can basically, you know, help more and more men take responsibility and take ownership of their life, so that they can live a life of joy and love and hope, and also follow your lead. I mean, again, you could have, you know, basically let this take you out, or to really stop you in your tracks, but you didn't. And you are living proof, and that's why it's critical that you are here with us this afternoon, because you are living proof that it can be done, and that you can get help, and that you can remain, you know, on a track that will bring forth, you know, outstanding accomplishments. And you can also do what you're doing right now, which we appreciate very much, and that is giving back and showing others the way. So let's talk about the training next week, if you don't mind. Share a few more things about that.
So I want to tie a comment I see in the chat here. Someone said that in our family, mental health issues are generational. And I think that's a great segue to what we're going to do next week. There are generational things that get passed on from our families. And so the home is the first place where we learn how to build relationships. It's the first place where we learn certain skills by the intentional efforts of our parents and caretakers, or by the unintentional behaviors that are modeled. So next week, my colleague and I, Richard, are going to take your folks through really three things. One is, why is the family unit the most important place to teach skills around connecting with other human beings, whether that be race, ethnicity, culture, whatever the case may be? Why is the home so important today for those skills to begin to be developed? We're going to talk about our relational intelligence framework. This is a framework that is based off of 20 years of research in both practice on the personal side as well as in the professional side of life. This is a playbook, a blueprint that we've developed that will give people an ability to practice skills that they can own on their own. And they're, you have a personality that's unique to yourself, Richard. I have a personality, but we each have to learn how to develop trust with others.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to equip your members with this toolkit, what it means, how it applies to families, what parents should do with their children, what mental health professionals should be teaching parents or people who oversee children to build those relationships. And then I think the most important fact for next week is we're going to make this an interactive session with a participant's guide where people are going to be going through exercise and activities so they can reflect on what relationships have meant in their lives. And then they can learn how to take these tools and apply these tools to the people that they support and that they take care of in their communities and their interests.
Right. And I know you will, take a deeper dive, of course, in the training session scheduled for next week. But the 5 essential relational intelligence pillars or skills, you touched on some of them. Can you really maybe say a little bit more about those 5 again?
Absolutely, yes. So there are 5 skills in our framework. The first one is establishing rapport. And we define this, Richard, as the ability to use energy to create a positive connection with other people. That's the first skill. You can't build a relationship unless you establish foundational rapport. The second skill is understanding others. This is the ability to be intentional about putting in the time and effort needed to get to know other people. In the home life, the intentional behaviors and actions that parents practice instill those type of skills in their children. The third skill, embracing individual differences. This is the ability to be authentic in acknowledging and accepting that everyone comes from different backgrounds and experiences. When we look at the Black household, we are taught, or at least we should be taught, about racism and stigmas and things that we're going to have to face in the outside world. Mm-hmm. A lot of times we're not taught about that. We have to find out about that in a hard way. But embracing individual differences is teaching people about understanding and appreciation of those differences. Developing trust is the most important framework piece in our puzzle. It is the ability to be vulnerable and risk being exposed to the actions and behaviors of others. So the concepts of humility and vulnerability play a big role there. And then the last piece, cultivating influence. This is about having a positive and meaningful impact on others. So it is the impact parents have on their children. It is the impact that mentors have on young Black men and women. So those 5 skills, they are interconnected, interrelated, but they do build on each other. And again, these are things that we have seen through our research apply at an early age. You can teach kids 3, 4, 5 years old about empathy and active listening and being curious. On up through the C-suite of some of the CEOs that we coach, these skills are applicable across the board.
Of those 5, again, all of them are critical and important. This is going to be a power-packed training session without a doubt in my mind because of the conversation we're having right now around these 5 essential skills that I think are critical and important. If you could, and there may be a few questions on the page if Andrea, if Roxana wants to share those, but what's the big difference, Dr. Bandelli, between, let's say, emotional intelligence and relational intelligence?
Yeah. Great question. So emotional intelligence is defined really as the ability to understand your emotions, the emotions of others, and how to manage emotions effectively. Mm-hmm. The thing with emotional intelligence is it is a skill set like relational intelligence, but our research has shown that it can prove or be used for good or bad purposes. I can use my EQ, Richard, to inspire or motivate you, or I can use my EQ to manipulate, to instill fear, to coerce you to do certain things that I want you to do. With relational intelligence, which again, we define as the ability to successfully connect with people and build strong, long-lasting relationships. That's the key there. You can't build relationships and try to manipulate people. You can't be self-serving and try to engage in behaviors that are only going to benefit you. That's the big difference between relational intelligence and EQ. Relational intelligence is a skill set. EQ is involved in that. You have to be able to read emotions to interact with people, but it is for the benefit of growing and sustaining long-term healthy relationships. EQ is a tool that can be used for selfish and self-serving purposes, or it can be used for purposes to build relationships.
Okay. Wow. Powerful. Again, I love the distinction between the two. Trust, Dr. Bandelli, is, again, one of those characteristics or skills, in terms of how do we really regain trust, because it's something that, I know exists, mistrust. persists and exists in a lot of our relationships for all kinds of reasons, some good, some bad, and some real and some imagined. But trust, if you don't mind taking a minute or two to really help us with what kind of activities might be useful, because again, it's one of those things that we learn early on to either mistrust or to trust. And it's not just something that we talk about, but it's something that we experience. Yeah. So a lot of men don't trust women. Women don't trust men. In our homes, there's a lot of mistrust because of the experiences that we're having in our homes. Yeah. Say a little bit more about that, if you don't mind, sir.
So I think for many of us, and I know at least in my own experiences, we are taught you can't trust anyone. And I saw that modeled by behaviors from my parents and things that you would never expect a parent to do that I experienced.
Right.
And so I think a lot of us come from a place of trust must be earned. I think that's a foundational piece there. When you're building a marriage or a relationship or working with a client, you have to be able to unpack that with people. And there are certain things you need to do to extend trust. Relationally intelligent people extend trust. They don't demand it or expect it to be earned. And they do that through what we call the 5 C's. This is things like being competent, being committed to what you're trying to accomplish, being consistent, having good character, being able to be courageous and say the things that need to be said. So there are things you can do to build trust with people, investments you can make, things you can do to grow a relationship, but it does require work and effort. And you have to understand this is where having good EQ and being able to be curious and ask questions, you don't know when you're interacting with other people what part of their journey they're on. And in a romantic sense, they just get out of a bad relationship and now they don't trust men or women. Or in a business sense, they just lose a job and they don't trust employers. To really help someone and build a deep relationship, you have to meet them where they are. And so the people that we coach, the relationally intelligent leaders that we work with, understand that. They understand that trust is one of the most critical skills you have to develop. And when it is damaged or broken, it can be almost impossible to repair. What we will share next week with folks is some steps where you can repair it. There are things you can do. Our research has shown there are certain steps you can take if you've broken trust or you've had trust damaged on you that can be done to restore a relationship. So we're going to have an exercise next week. We're going to talk through a lot of that to help people unpack what that might be. Because I think all of us at some point in our lives have been on the receiving end of damaged trust, or we've broken trust, whether intentionally or not intentionally, with others. And I think that will be really life-giving next week to show people that there is a pathway to restoration when trust is broken.
A pathway to restoration when trust is broken. Wow. It's going to be an amazing session. And again, you all, it's only going to be a 3-hour session. But we want to at least indicate that, there are calls for more, sessions that will follow next week's session. So again, the hope is that this can be a series, because in terms of applying or the application aspect of all of this, folks need more information and more skills in order to really make this real in the lives of not only themselves, but the lives of those that they work with. Dr. Bandelli, we only have a few minutes left, but again, I want to really, thank you and allow you to share any closing comments or remarks. I know that the session information for the session this week has been posted on the Facebook page and on our website. I want to again thank all those members of the BMHA staff, Black Mental Health Alliance staff, our ED, Andrea, Brown, who is our executive director, for allowing these kinds of sessions and trainings to be provided to our community. I want everyone to lift up our staff, Cheryl Maxwell and Roxana Finkster, Nia Jones, and Lynn Johnson. Anyone that I miss, forgive me, but I think I named everybody who is instrumental in really helping do the work at our organization, the Black Mental Health Alliance. Again, the book has been also listed on the Facebook page, and we will make certain that it's you can share the title again, Relational Intelligence, but you can say a few more things about that if you want, Dr. Bandelli, in a few minutes that we have left. But again, tremendous appreciation and respect for you and the information that you've shared and your transparency. and how you have basically laid out what's critical and what's important if we really want to succeed in life, succeed in our homes first, succeed in our personal lives, succeed in our families, and then succeed in life. And again, you're living proof that it's being done, but it's ongoing. I mean, you indicated that you're still in therapy.
Yeah.
So it's not something that you can basically start and just, say, okay, we've seen other entertainers and celebrities talk about that. Well, I'm healed, it's over, and so forth and so on. And we can see the bad manifestations of what happens when folks take that path. So again, I don't want to lift those up. In the few minutes that we have left, sir, I want to give you any time, the last few minutes, if you want to share anything else that you think is critical and important for our audience to appreciate and to understand.
I think we go back to where you started today when you introduced me, Richard, and you talked about my mission and my purpose in life. This concept that I developed over 20 years ago doing my dissertation in graduate school, and have honed and refined and perfected and mastered over the last 2 decades of my life. It is a playbook that will help people build relationships across all areas of their life. And this session next week is really near and dear to my heart and Natalie's heart, because Black and brown children should be learning these skills at an early age. I know I wasn't. She can tell next week she wasn't. We weren't given these tools when we were growing up. And I think it's our responsibility, and it's our way to pay it forward to the future generations of Black kids who will have benefits and things that we didn't have. Teaching them this skill set will be a really powerful way to help them navigate a world of unpredictability, of change, and really help position them to get the careers that they want to get, to be confident in how they show up in social circles and environments. And so if there's any group that I can share this information with, it's with our community to help them grow and develop in their relationships.
Okay. You're not going to want to miss this session next week, you all. Again, we're definitely promoting, it for all the right reasons. But if you've heard, the story of Dr. Adam Bandelli, you will want to basically be a part of the training session next week. And also, he will be present, but also his top-notch staff member, and he's listed her name up a few times. You want to say a little bit more about her before we leave, Dr. Bandelli? Natalie?
Yeah, no, we're excited. Yeah.
She's okay. She's going to be present. And again, I saw a copy of the workbook, you all, and it's worth it's worth everything that Dr. Bandelli has lifted up in terms of the skills that will be offered, the conversations. It's going to be interactive. It's going to be, something that you don't want to miss. And so again, Dr. Bandelli, we appreciate you. We honor you. We know that this is your mission. One of your missions in life is to give back and to help folks understand and appreciate the significance of relational intelligence. And we applaud you for investing years of your time in developing this concept and this paradigm so that we can be better in our relationships and be better people and bring our best to the table 24/7, 365. Thank you, sir. Have a great afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
All right, excellent. Thank you.
And to everybody out there who tuned in this afternoon, we appreciate you. We thank you for sharing your time with us and for giving up your afternoon, part of your afternoon, to be with us this afternoon. So we hope that this was beneficial, and we look forward to seeing all of you next week during our session. Thank you. Have a great afternoon. Be safe and be well. Take care now.